Everyone, it's Amy from So Let's Be Quilty Studio and So Let's Make a Bag. So I just wanted to go over really quickly a few tips when you are fussy cutting. So fussy cutting means that if you have a print like Alice that went out in the last box, there are some amazing elements that you might want to put in a particular place. And how do you kind of work that out? How do you figure that out? So the first thing in a pattern, especially if you're doing a pattern that your height and your width are close to similar sizes, you want to make sure what your pattern maker is telling you. So in any of your patterns, you should have a little synopsis of basic things that they do for their particular pattern. That is on the top of the instructions. They usually say, the finished side. So all of their instructions are going to be wide, high, deep, right? So when you're cutting something out and it says 10 3/4, that's wide, by 11 1/4, that's high. So when you're trying to figure out where your element should be, that's the first thing I would do, is kind of make sure you know where your wide and your high is. This one, we have a particular size, so I'm hoping you can see this. So there's 10 1/4 or 10 3/4 right here, and 11 1/4. So if I want my Alice to be in the center, then you want her to be about 5 1/2, right? So you kind of have to think about how far from the top she is and how far from the bottom, and where that lies as far as your final piece. So you know that you're going to have a bit of it going around to the bottom. So what I usually do is I kind of always read through your instructions. Super important, because that helps, especially when you're fussy cutting. So I know that that I'm going to have a bit of it below the surface, right? So look at your instructions, see how far from the top, and then what the finish size is. So if we know the finish size of this is going to be 9 high, then I want my Alice to be in that window, right? So if I want her to be centered, and I want her to be, her feet, her whole person to be above the fold of the purse, I know that 9 is where I'm going for. So when I am cutting out my piece, I am moving this around, and maybe it's helpful to put a piece of washi tape on your final dimensions so you can kind of play around with where that should be. So if I know 9 is where I'm going, and then I'm going to have like a zipper and something else. So I think I want to make like about 1 inch from the top, and then make sure her feet are just above the 9-inch mark. And then I'm going to mark my 10 and whatever the dimension is. I'm going to mark my dimension on there in chalk, something that goes away. And then I'm going to look at it and say, oh, that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to cut it out. So I'm not just going to cut the dimensions and hope that Alice ends up in the right place. So I hope that is super helpful. The other thing for this particular pattern, for the Tiffany pattern, is you have 2 of your pieces that are cut out as a pattern. So if you wanted a certain element in that space, then again, I would probably play around with it and then mark it, and then see where it ends up, and then I would cut it out. So those are just really just simple kind of tips for when you're fussy cutting something for your purse. Also look at where your handles are going to lie, and make sure you're not putting Alice's face right in the middle of a handle. And just kind of, most importantly, just go over the instructions and make sure you understand what is going to be on top of this. If this ends up on, one of these ends up on the pocket, then maybe kind of figure out what element you want on the pocket. And then the other side, put the Alice on the other side. So just a few quick and simple tips for fussy cutting the Tiffany bag for September's So Let's Make a Bag. And I will see you guys later. Have a great weekend.